If anybody asks you what the purpose of life is, everyone has the same answer. I want to be happy. I don't want to suffer. Everything that you think that you want, I want to be married. I want to have children. I want to be rich. I want to not leave Japan. I want to leave Japan. I want my children to stay here. I want my children to go abroad. Everything that you want for yourself is because you think it's going to prevent suffering and make you happy. When Paramhansa Yogananda came out of India in 1920 and went directly to the United States, which is where his gurus had sent him, he brought with him a small book that was called The Science of Religion. And he was trying to take millennia of ancient Indian wisdom and put it into the simplest possible form so that impatient Americans who were not impressed by things being old, but want things to be new, would understand. And this is simply what he said. Everyone wants to avoid suffering. Everyone wants to find happiness. But the project of life and the project of our multiple incarnations is that we are very confused as to what really brings us happiness and what really brings us suffering. And so all of our thousands and thousands of incarnations are for one purpose, which is to give us enough experience and to have that experience make a deep enough impression on us that we will gradually begin to notice. And the other aspect of that is that we're not inventing anything new. You know, just by the way, I know this room is echoey, and if you're having trouble and you're listening directly, if you pull your chairs around a little closer, you'll find the echo is less pronounced. Just in case, I don't mind if you pick up your chairs and come this way. It's what Jesus said to the crippled man. He said, pick up your chair and walk. A miracle followed. I can't promise that, but if you need to move, feel free. So going on is that it's not that we invent something. It's not that we discover some brand new way of being happy that no human being has ever thought about. In fact, oftentimes people will print some piece of wisdom that seems so modern, and then you'll read it and it was centuries ago, or even, 2,000 years ago, or 5,000 years ago. And it sounds like it could have been written yesterday. A parent's lament about how disappointing their children are, the sadness of old age. The entire story of the life of the Buddha was his father trying to prevent him from understanding the nature of life so that the son, the prince, would follow the ways of the king. And all of you know, the predictions when the Buddha was born, that he would either be a great king or a great sage. His father wanted him to be a king, so he created a completely false universe for his son, in which he never saw human suffering. And then, of course, karma being what it is, Buddha escaped for a time, saw old age, disease, and death. And he was so astonished. And he said, is this the fate of everyone? And of course, it is. And he said, then why are we spending all our time just pretending that that's not true? Because the human mind, the ego mind, thinks that happy means easy and comfortable. When people talk about their karma being good, it means that things are easy and comfortable. And when we speak of our karma being bad, that invariably means that things are difficult, challenging, and uncomfortable. So the problem is, and this is what I was starting to say, the whole process of right living and of spiritual movement toward enlightenment, it can be all described by the simple word awareness. If you think back on what growth is or progress is in anything that you do, starting with a little baby, sometimes a little baby has to be swaddled because otherwise their hands will fly in front of their face and the child gets frightened. The child is not aware that this is my own hand. Is that they're sitting there perfectly calm and then some wild thing comes and attacks them. They are not aware yet of how to control the hand. They don't know it's just their own hand. We're so charmed also when little children pick their feet up and suck on their toes. First, we're astonished that they can do that. But then they don't know it's their own foot. You try to get a child to eat, they don't know where the mouth is. But the mouth is right where it's always been, but they're not aware of how to get it where they need to move it. That's simple. Think about in your own life, anything that you would consider to have been progressive is always because you became aware of something you weren't aware of. Oh, I didn't understand that way of relating people, they didn't like it. I grew up in a family, my brother was a competitive debater. At that time, we lived in Texas, which is one of the largest states in the United States. For 2 years in a row, my brother was the champion of the whole state of Texas in the field of debate. So you can imagine that our dinner table conversation was not always peaceable. And so I thought that debate was conversation. I present my arguments as best I can present them. Then I listen to yours. Then you tell me yours. And then I tell you what's wrong with yours. I was much older than I should have been before I realized that a lot of people didn't enjoy that, right? It was always true, but I wasn't aware of it. We may have very bad habits of many kinds, addictions to wrong foods, to too much caffeine, to dealing with other people's unhappiness by closing our hearts. And all of those things do not promote happiness, they promote suffering, but we're not aware of it. So the purpose of our life is to learn what we don't already know. Now, there's a very interesting other fact here that has to be understood, which is there are those souls who have incarnated repeatedly, many of them, who have learned everything there is to know about human life. Those are the avatars, the Buddhas, whatever words we use, the Christs, the God-realized masters. And they are exactly the same as you and me. They have just become aware of much more than we are aware of. And they too lived many incarnations. And in each incarnation, they either learned or they didn't learn, but something happened. Paramhansa Yogananda, from his position of being a fully realized soul, made the astonishing statement that he consciously remembered his individual incarnations all the way back to the level of being a diamond. First, you think a diamond is an individual. No, I have you can't see it, but I have an astrological bangle that I wear, the Navratna, which has a stone for every one of the 9 planets. One of them is a diamond, as it happens. I wore the diamond on my hand for a long time, but now I wear it here. And I would often look at the diamond and think, who are you? You know? And what was so interesting, and I had 2 other stones that I had picked out of a handful of stones. You know, when I was shopping and I went to a wholesaler, he put a handful of, in that case, emeralds into my hand. You may think I'm a wealthy person. I am not. This is all just the grace of God. But I'm holding a handful of emeralds. One of them basically said to me, I belong to you. And it was just true. There was no question in my mind. That one belonged to me. So when Yogananda says, I remember all the way back to being a gemstone, there's a piece of me that understands. I have questions like, was he a cut diamond or an uncut diamond? You know? And if he was a cut diamond, were the other pieces, like, did they become his friends and family later on? But I never got those questions answered. But the fascinating thing to think about, if you can imagine how many stages of evolution just to get to the human level. This is, of course, Sanatana Dharma, and this is Buddhism, the teaching of all these incarnations as we learn, just to get to the human level. And then to have to go through all the things you have to learn to arrive at a complete understanding. And you see, the reason this particular statement touches my heart so deeply is one of the things that we inadvertently do, one of the causes of our suffering is that we think somehow we're not very good, that we're not worthy, that somehow everybody else has a divine spark, but somehow when divinity was passed out, I wasn't in the right line. I didn't get it. God loves everyone and has hope for everyone, but not me, but not me. Or we do things that are so inexcusably stupid after we've done them that we just think, again, there's no hope, right? But now this is how you have to think about it. Everybody's destiny, every one of us, and this is the ancient teaching. I have, as I said to you at the beginning, because of my long association with Kriyananda, I was able to learn a great deal about this. Many things by this point in my life, I have tested with my own experience, and I can speak from my experience. I know this to be true. One of the things that I have tested over many years is that Kriyananda knew what he was talking about. So when Yogananda or Kriyananda offer a principle that I can't verify with my own brain or my own life experience, I trust them. So part of that story is that even though we are uniquely individual, this is part of the extraordinary nature of creation. I am looking now at all of your faces. I have the wonderful privilege of seeing you all, where mostly you can just see me. And I can see all the unique fire and light of how the divine is playing in every one of you. And every one of you and everyone you see on the planet has this huge story. You know, all the things that they've been through. I was with Swami Kriyananda once in Los Angeles at Disneyland. In the early years of Disneyland, it was very innocent. It was a complete world apart from popular culture. And Swami Kriyananda used to enjoy going there. And sometimes whenever we didn't live in Los Angeles, but when we would go there for a program, we'd always set aside a day and go to Disneyland. He also took us there because they did everything excellently. And we were a little sloppy in those days. And he wanted us to see what it looked like to do things well. But one of the features, this, I'm talking 1970s, so this is a long time ago. The Disney characters, you know, Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse and Goofy and all of them, when sun would go down, they would wear these costumes that had electric lights. I'm sure the technology is 100 million times different now, but these would just walk down the street for what they called the electric parade, and we loved it. So we went early to get our little spot on the sidewalk. There were about 15 of us there. And Swami's looking out at this hundreds of people from all different countries. And as it happened, vividly in my mind, there was a Japanese couple with two small children. And this whole story is very focused on just those people that I saw for 1 minute in my life. Unless one of you is that grown-up child, but I wouldn't know at this point. And one of the things that would happen with Swami Kriyananda, he was extremely natural, very approachable. He had an extraordinary consciousness, but he was also was able to just live very easily with others. And he told us repeatedly that's how Yogananda was. In myth and legend, these great souls become more and more separated from us. But in actual real life, they're just the best iteration of what it means to be a human being. But Swamiji also unpredictably, meaning every so often, his consciousness would just, he would become aware, or let me say it differently, he would reveal his awareness that he was seeing this world very differently than the rest of us. And standing on the sidewalk, waiting for Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse to come down the sidewalk, turned out to be one of those moments. And he looked out at all these hundreds of people and he said to us, imagine, he said, not merely loving all these people, which in itself is a pretty big challenge. He said, imagine being as much inside their consciousness as you are inside your own. And he said that was the state of consciousness of Paramahansa Yogananda. He was one with everything, and he was aware of his oneness. And that's why he could, well, that's how he could help people. Now, and in that moment, we'd just been running around Disneyland, getting on and off the rides and eating ice cream. And all of a sudden, just everyone right into the spine. And we just sat down on the sidewalk and started meditating. There was nothing else to do because imagine not merely loving all these people, which was enough, but imagine being as committed to their well-being. That's what Master meant. That's what I call Yogananda. That's what Yogananda meant. But Swami was trying to tell us, your welfare, everyone's well-being is of equal importance to me. And the revelation of it, we sat down on the sidewalk, we meditated for about half an hour, and finally Minnie Mouse and Mickey Mouse were coming in front of us. We sort of came out of it. We were then surrounded by people. I don't know what they were thinking with all of us, but we didn't care. Now, in all of this, going back to Yogananda, we are all on this journey from the beginning, I guess, from down to being a diamond, where we are in delusion because there's so much about the reality of what brings happiness and what causes suffering that we don't know. That's what delusion is. We do not know how to make ourselves happy. Even though that's the only thing we want, we are not aware of the consequences of our actions, and we don't have the energy and clarity to make the right choices. So what happens to us is we get the consequences, which are consistently not what we want until it penetrates. So we move up this spectrum of awareness until we understand, and that's why those who become more enlightened, Buddha had everything you would think that a human being would want or need to make them happy. Had wealth, he had position, he had a family that loved him. And in the end, when he renounced the world, he had a beautiful wife whom he loved, who was about to give birth to his son. I mean, he had the whole list. But he was aware of the fact that even though that looks like the source of happiness is within. Now, it isn't to say that one can't have that source within and then live in the world in the way everyone else lives. But your awareness of what you're doing is completely different. And your dependency, the source of your happiness is completely different. So each of these stages on this spectrum, from complete lack of awareness to total awareness, literally of infinity, and our awareness of our oneness with all that is a vibration, you might say. It vibrates at a certain level, either a dense, unsubtle level or an increasingly subtle level. I mean, this modern physics talks about all of this too. And so even if, you are manifesting that particular lack of awareness in a totally different way, it's still one vibration. So every soul that attains absolute freedom has to pass through every vibration that every one of us has been through. And literally, no matter what you do, Jesus also did it. Yogananda also did it. The Buddha also did it. And sometimes we look back in kind of a slightly humorous, semi-charming way. Sometimes we look back at some of the things we did and thought, what could I have been thinking? I've been, as I said, part of this spiritual path since I was 22. And I can I can attest for the fact that these spiritual practices work, because you should have seen me then. That's all I can say. And I've had a lot of the same friends. I have many, many friends that I've had for 50 years who've been doing the same as me. And you should have seen them then, because at the time, that was all we were aware of. But we got the consequences of our own actions. And because we were tuned in to why we were here, which was not to set it all up neatly on the outside, but to learn what it is that we don't know. For one reason, to fulfill the purpose of life. So I often think about the masters as if they're having tea together somewhere in the astral world. Buddha invites Krishna over and they decide to bring Christ in, because he's such a good conversationalist. I have no idea. And they laugh at themselves, the same that we laugh at ourselves. Oh yeah, that was quite an incarnation, wasn't it? That one 10,000 times after I was a diamond, that was not a very enlightened one, but we figured it out. So we go through life in lots of different ways. Sometimes the first way that we go through life is we just try to protect ourselves from having to learn anything. And we try to protect the people around us from having to learn anything. Swami Kriyananda had a very touching way of finding peace with the sufferings of others. One of the real causes of suffering is not just what happens to us, but what happens to people we love, or even what happens to people that we don't even know. Nowadays, the media makes absolutely certain that every terrible thing that happens anywhere in the world is immediately shared with everyone else in the world. We are not working in our own best interests right now, but that's what the world is like. So anyone with a sensitive heart, it's always being pierced by suffering. So it's what we have to become aware of is not merely whether people are suffering, but why does it keep happening? Karma is the word that we use when we talk from what Yogananda spoke of. Everything is karma, but the more common a word is used, sometimes the meaning gets lost. Karma is an unlearned lesson about what brings suffering and what brings happiness. It's something we don't understand. So we have a vibration within us that is not in harmony with our destiny. It's not in harmony with our highest happiness. So it creates a dissonance. And what you have to understand is this is a conscious process, but it's not conscious necessarily to what we think of as ourselves. We have the word that I'm wanting is the word ego. But ego is often also used in a way that is not helpful, because people think that, the enemy is the ego, it's just my ego. But since we identify so much with that self, that puts us at war with ourselves. And one of the very unhelpful things on the spiritual path or in life is to be your own enemy, because then you never have a place of sanctuary, ever. But ego is simply this. It is the infinite, which our consciousness, if we were aware of it, is infinite. But we incarnate in one body, and because we have one body, only one, it limits us right away. I am American. Many of you are Japanese. I can see that some are Indian. Woman spoke to me with a very pronounced British accent. Undoubtedly, that was her origin point. And so right away, I'm female. I'm from the USA. I was born in a certain year. This is the color of my skin. And that, if you ask, who are you? I would tell you all those things. That's who I am. And simultaneously, there, on a level that I'm not aware of right now, there's an infinite aspect to my nature. Ego is our individuality identified with our limitation. And of course, that causes us all kinds of trouble, because then it thinks that I'm separate from you. And it can go even farther to say, well, because of the color of my skin, I'm better than you. Because of the language I speak, or the money I have, or the talent and strength I have, I'm better than you. And we also accidentally think that I don't care what happens to you, I only care what happens to me. And we will take what we think of as our happiness at the expense of others. And at first it looks good. I stole my brother's inheritance, you say. Now I have more money, and all that money will make me happy. The fact that I've impoverished my brother, well, that's not my problem. Until 3 or 4 incarnations later, when your brother, perhaps the same brother, steals your inheritance. And then all of a sudden, this does not feel good. And at first, you just then wait to steal it from him, And then he steals it from you, and you steal it from him, and he steals it from you, and you steal it from him, and it goes on like that until at some point it occurs to you, this is not making me happy. That's karma. So the purpose of life is to ask whenever anything happens, oh, Divine Mother, and that's how I think of God, because I think the Mother is the most approachable way. One of the many good ideas, new stories that Yogananda put into his autobiography is to personify the infinite spirit in the form of the Mother. And I'm not talking about Lakshmi and Kali and all of that. I'm talking about an inner relationship that makes us unafraid. If you really take all of the unlearned lessons that we have to learn and think about this carefully when you have time, every distress, every mistake that we make, the core issue is always fear. So it's most important that we find a way to relate to God, however we feel it, in some way that makes us feel comforted rather than afraid. You know, the ideal of a mother, whether you've experienced it in human life or whether you know what you want but didn't get, is the one who always understands you and is always on your side. That doesn't mean that the ideal mother spoils you and doesn't tell you the truth. I remember once I was having back then, I used to have a difficult time sometimes making a commitment. And I would procrastinate when I had to, especially when I had to make travel plans for doing this kind of work. I just would, for some reason, I would postpone and postpone. One of my friends was trying to help me, and they tried to help me by explaining to me all the catastrophic things that were going to happen if I didn't hurry up and make a decision and get this trip in order. You know, it would all double up and just be a mess. And the more they talked about all the bad things that would happen, the more paralyzed I became with fear. Finally, I said, I'm perfectly aware of all the bad things that happen. I want someone to comfort me, you know? And they laughed and said, oh, okay, you're a good girl. You can do it, you know, like that. And I was making a joke, but it was very real. I mean, most of healing is when you overcome your fear, isn't it? It doesn't mean that you won't remain sick or you won't die or you will get back what you've lost. But we're afraid, how am I going to go on? How am I going to live without that? How am I going to live with this? But if we can have this inward relationship with Divine Mother and always have that friend inwardly, because you see, all the masters tell us that the end of this story is bliss. And it's so, what's so interesting about that is because the beginning of the story is a search for happiness, isn't it? And the end of the story, according to all the ancient wisdom and all the masters, is we will find it. But we will only find it when we become aware of what the true source of happiness is. You know, the open, fearless heart. So every time we go through a difficult anything, no matter how awful, and this is a very hard teaching. Every time I really try to talk about karma and the process of moving from delusion to enlightenment, I recognize how challenging it is. That's why very few people really want to hear it. Because here's the problem, you see. If karma is true anywhere, it has to be true everywhere. And that means that it's always fair. Not that it's fair in the little world terms, because it often isn't. And innocent people are often being hurt, and it's unbearable. But the end of the story is always bliss. And every saint and every master says, when you begin to be aware of the whole pattern and you look back at it, you realize that Divine Mother was always holding your hand and taking you. I thought of it once like, think of it like this, just how confusing this is. What if you have the impression that some dear friend who you've really trusted has betrayed you, and your heart just breaks at the mere thought of the betrayal, and then a whole lot of other things happen, and you take actions and you have attitudes, and your friend may try to protest, but you don't listen. But then eventually you become aware that they never did betray you, that the whole thing was a giant misunderstanding from the beginning. What happened? What happened is we perceived reality in a certain way, and because of our perception, we suffered. So was it our friend's fault that we suffered? If you're walking through a forest and you see a stick that looks like a poisoned snake, and you become terribly upset and you try to run away and you run into a tree and you fall and break your arm, and then you break your arm and then you miss your whatever you're supposed to do, and then this happens and that happens. But it was never a poison snake. It was just how you read it and what happened afterwards. Have you actually been mistreated? These are challenging questions. And this is the answers that Yogananda, that Kriyananda, that the Buddha, that Christ, that every great master, St. Francis, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, everyone, this is what they always say. We are being led by Divine Mother to a state of perfect bliss. And this is what I say to myself. If there was an easier way for us to take us there, she would take us there. And so if this is the only path that's going to get me to where I want to go, you think of the people who climb Mount Everest, which is now quite a lot of people climb Mount Everest. It doesn't look like any fun to me. I do not know why people would want to do it, but if they do, they do. It's arduous, it's painful. You may die in the attempt, your friends may die, all kinds of things can happen, but people do it. And it's not like it's any fun, but they know where they're going. And when they get there, they know that every amount of effort is the only road to the top. And so I was starting to say, Swami Kriyananda had such a beautiful way when he would see people suffering. This was his thought. He said, oh, when they awake to the infinite loving presence of God, that awakening will be all the sweeter because of the contrast it will make to the suffering they're going through now. So when and this was also his perception. For me, this is an affirmation. For Swami, it was his perception. He was outside of the limitations of time. When you, very interesting. I'm going to draw a diagram with my fingers. Imagine a circle like the wheel of a bicycle. We see all the bicycles here. And in the center of the wheel, there's a hub. And there's all these spokes. And they all connect like this. And we think of time, here's the present, here's the past, here's the future on that rim. And where we live on the rim. So we live, and the more fixed we are on one spot on that rim, the less we can anticipate the future and the less we understand the past. I lived in this little apartment for a while, and the window of the apartment was right on a driveway where people had their cars. In California, everybody has a car. And at 6 a.m., which is an early time in California lifestyle, on a Saturday morning, which nobody would go to work, so Saturday was a day off, one of my neighbors pulled his car up right outside my window, turned on a radio station that was not one I would ever listen to, turned it up really loud, and started working on his engine with seemingly absolutely no awareness that I and quite a few other people were still sleeping just feet away from where he was. But he was so fixed, I want to fix my car, I'm going to fix my car now, that there was just no other reality around him. And I'm sure in his life, people were often inconsiderate of him. And probably when they were inconsiderate of him, he was totally confused as to why people didn't take him into account, because he couldn't see past the moment he was living in, because he's so identified with that. The center of the wheel is perfect divine consciousness. And the center of the wheel, past, future, present, equidistant. And as we expand and expand our sense of identity from the tiny little speck that we are at the edge, as we move closer toward that super consciousness, think about it. You see a lot more of the rim, don't you? And you begin to understand how your past actions have caused the present, and how your present actions are going to cause the future. And what causes us to realize that? Darn it, suffering. When everything goes perfectly, we're simply not motivated to think. So we always have to ask when something happens. We can say, we can accuse God of mistreating us, or we can just ask with genuine interest, why are you doing this to me? With a real desire to know. What unlearned lesson is being given to me? And every saint and every master promises, if we just keep expanding our awareness, the end of the story is bliss. If it isn't a happy ending, it's not the ending. And the thing about this is we can't be different than we are. You can't just make yourself know something when you don't know it. You can't pretend to be free when you're not free. And the good news is every saint and every master stood right where you're standing, and they know exactly what you're feeling, and they're totally sympathetic because they remember. Isn't that so? When somebody is doing something that isn't the best for them, but you yourself have lived through it, that's how we have compassion, isn't it? Oh yeah, I remember. Yeah, that's a hard one to go through, isn't it? If they're receptive, you might try this, that might help you. And sometimes we can be very persuasive because we actually know. And so you're standing right there, whatever it is, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Yogananda, they're all standing around you with perfect sympathy and perfect familiarity. And you take Divine Mother's hand and you say, very simple, this is the simplest, most effective prayer that I know. Help, 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 help. We're not alone. That's one of the things that we have to become most aware of. Doesn't matter how lonely you feel. We're never alone. Even in this moment, if we had the eyes to see, legions of angels are here. All these wonderful death and return stories tell us how different this world is than we think it is. We're so ego-identified with the smallness that we miss. One of my favorite, I love these stories anyway, all these people who go to the other side and come back. This man died, and when he went to whatever world he went to, and he notably, he was nobody in this world would have known his name. He was not a person of great accomplishment. He was just one of us, just an ordinary person. And he said he walked into this astral world, this world of energy. He said it was a sports stadium filled with thousands of angels. And when he came out onto the center of the field, they all stood up and cheered him. Can you imagine? Even, who knows, whether it was factual or not, but I love that one. Sometimes in my weaker moments, I sort of, in my mind, I walk out, into the center of the stadium and I watch all my angels stand up and start cheering me, not for getting it right, but for wanting to get it right. I was in a situation where, let me think, I had tried to help someone, but my advice should rather have been kept to myself because the person wasn't interested in hearing what I had to say. And what he actually did, the person that I had offended, he called Swami Kriyananda and told Swami his version of what he thought I had done, which was a little distorted about but that's how he received it. And basically told Swamiji that I was not qualified, to be out on my own on the street without a keeper and a leash, because I was too likely to get in trouble and cause a lot of trouble to people. I'm exaggerating, but that's what he said. I had been very sincere in my desire to be helpful. I was very insensitive and wrong, but I meant well. And my friend, because he's still my friend, he could have been nicer about it, but he wasn't. So I was, what do I do? And I said to Swami, what do I do? And this is what he said. God reads your heart, is what he said. And what he meant by that is Divine Mother knows us better even than we know ourselves. And he said, we cannot be responsible for how other people respond because they have their own karma too. We can't make them behave a certain way, but we are responsible for what we intend. And he said, purify your intention. Try to use your brain too and not do foolish things, but God reads the heart. You see, that's our final comfort, that God reads the heart. And as I was saying before, we usually know what's right and wrong. There's usually a voice of intuition. Sometimes we really don't know, but always, there's a little voice there, but we can't always follow it. But our mother loves us and she understands. She's very sympathetic. And that's what then we retreat to that comfort until we're not afraid. And then we can step forward again. That's what we're working with. That's the purpose of our lives, to live without fear. That's the nature of the masters. They're absolutely unafraid. No life demonstrates that more dramatically than the life of Christ, who just literally walked into a horrible death and didn't have to do it. But he wanted, many things, but he wanted us also to show what it looks like to be afraid of nothing. When he was in the Garden of Gethsemane and the armed Roman soldiers were coming to arrest him, and they didn't know which one among the group was him. And, the natural feeling would be, well, I'll just hide behind a tree over here and hope them go away. Instead, he stepped forward like that, and he said, whom do you seek? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. I am he. he said like that. And the story is told that when he stepped forward like that, there was such a powerful force that all those armed soldiers fell to the ground backwards. He didn't touch them, but that power. And among the many things that Jesus said were, that which I do, ye shall do, and greater things. And he wasn't flattering us. He was saying, eventually, all we have to do, well, we can even stop. We can even refuse to cooperate. One of my friends gave me the advice once. She said, it's just not that easy to lie down and die, meaning it's not that easy to give up. You say, I quit. I'm just going to lie on my bed. I'm going to just lie down and die. I'm going to give up. You lie there for half an hour, 40 minutes. You get a little thirsty. Then you get a little hungry. Then you get really bored. And finally you get up again. Because there's a compelling inner reality that says, I was born for perfect happiness, and I will persevere till it comes. This is the message of all spiritual teaching. This is the purpose of our lives. Everything else is a detail. Where you live, what you do, how you serve, what you give, whether you succeed or fail outwardly. Well, all of that's very entertaining. And that's how we spend our time. But the only purpose of that is to give us the opportunity to expand our awareness, to overcome our fear, to learn what we don't know. And that's why we're here. I'd like to give you an opportunity to ask a few questions. Being an American, raised in a Jewish family, actually, reincarnation, what to speak of karma, was not part of my upbringing. So I was introduced to reincarnation, which is an essential part of karma, when I met Swami Kriyananda, when I read Autobiography of a Yogi. Of course, half the world knows about reincarnation, but I wasn't in that half growing up. So the reality, you can't think about karma unless you also factor in reincarnation. Because what you're describing to me is the thought that you actually can avoid things. So a large part of what motivates us, which gives us the courage and the determination, is a very simple thought. What choice do I have? And you see, this is part of what we have to come to understand, which is where I started. What brings happiness? What causes suffering? And when we live on the outside rim of this wheel of time and cling only to the little reality we know, we imagine, if I can just make it through today or tomorrow or this month, or until I die, then somehow I'll get away with it. There was a man who did a lot of work trying to help people who had terminal illnesses. And he would have conferences, and everyone coming had some kind of a diagnosis that told them, you're not going to live past this point, likely. And at the beginning, the first day, they would all make a list of everything they were going to miss out on because their life was going to end. I'll never see my daughter's wedding. I won't be able to see my grandchildren grow up. I'll never get to finish my university degree. You can see. And of course, it was heartbreaking. And they thought, naturally, this is the story. I have to grieve for my loss. The next day, he had them make a list of everything they were not going to have to face because they were going to die early. You know, I'm never going to have to pay off my credit card. You know, I'm not going to have to, what? I'm not going to have to finish my university degree. I'll never have to deal with my impossible boss again. I won't have to stay married to this person I accidentally married. I get to leave, you know. One of my friends, interlude here, her husband died after 60 years. He was a hard man. They held it together, but he was a hard man. Somebody thought she was sorrowful and said, "Don't worry, you'll get to see him again." She said, 60 years was quite enough. So there's also the things that you're going to get away with. And then in that seminar, that was much more important. What are we afraid to face? And what lengths will we go to avoid facing it? Now, I thought this whole exercise was so interesting. I tried to make a list. I started to make a list of those things I was going to get to avoid. But darn it, my understanding of reincarnation was so forceful that I absolutely knew I wasn't going to be able to avoid anything. I could face it later, but the problem with later is that when later arrives, it's now. And whatever it is that is plaguing us that we wish to avoid, it's because we didn't face it before. So this is where we have to start asking ourselves, what really brings happiness and what really causes suffering? Now, I have said to Divine Mother and myself, yeah, I know I'm going to have to face it sometime, but not yet. And I say quite openly and frankly, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to put it off for a little while because I don't want to. But I'm joking because, of course, we have to face it. And the only way you can do this is just a little piece at a time. We tend to think of life as a big all or nothing. One of the things, there was a man in our community, he doesn't live there anymore. He was very difficult. And he was not I didn't know how to get along with him. And I tried to avoid him. And I was in a position of leadership, and that was not the right response. Best I could do. And I had a situation in my life where I had a terrible fear that I had to face. And I was awake all night just worrying about it. And I kept praying to Divine Mother to comfort me, and I got no comfort. And all of a sudden, this intuition came to me, and I thought of this man who was totally unrelated to the situation I was in. But Divine Mother said to me, because of the way you have treated him, you have created a world in which people who suffer do not get compassion, because he was a very troubled man and he needed compassion, but I refused to give it to him. So you need compassion. You're not going to get it either. And it was like, oh, everything matters, doesn't it? And I think I'm avoiding something and getting away with it. But all I'm doing is just creating a cycle in which it will come back to me again. So what do I fear most? Do I fear having to do whatever it is that is hard for me now? Or do I want to wait until it doubles or triples because I've run away from it? Because you see, what happens is when the karma is this big and we need to become just a little bigger than the karma, But if instead we shrink, then even the same size karma looks bigger, you see? And it's a very simple thing. It doesn't work. But that is karma itself, is that we have to find out what works and what doesn't. Now, bear in mind, some of our karma is wonderful, because we get these wonderful opportunities. How do we merit these opportunities? It's just we're creating every thought, every feeling, every action is stored in the chakras and creates a magnetic field. And what is exactly what we need to balance will come to us. So we just have to be a little more interested and a little less identified with the short-term picture. We have to ask ourselves whether we want to look at our lives on the long rhythm, or even our lifetimes on the long rhythm, or whether we're going to try to grab some short-term comfort that sooner or later won't last. This is actually, you see, the whole story, which is we're always trying to be comforted from the outside rather than doing what we need to do to become strong within ourselves. And when we're finished here, my friend Shankar is going to talk about classes and courses, because this is not easy. But trust me, it's much more fun than not doing it. Whatever I've had to face since I understood the purpose of life and how to live it. And believe me, just because you decide to become a spiritual person doesn't mean that you don't have karma. So there's been lots and lots to face. But everything is easy compared to the time before, when I had no idea what life was about. That was awful. Now at least I know. When I had this job at Ananda for a couple of years that Swami Kriyananda had given to me, I was totally incompetent. He tried to help me, but I didn't know how to learn. And it was just a nightmare for a couple of years. And finally, he essentially fired me, traded my position with someone else. But I knew I was being fired because I was so terrible at the job. And he told me I didn't have to do the job anymore on a Friday. And I knew there was going to be some hard things he was going to say to me. I said, "Sir, I know that there's a lot I'm going to have to hear and I'm going to have to face. But why don't you just give me the weekend and I'll just be happy on the weekend, because I'm not going to have to do this job anymore. So I'm going to be happy on Saturday and Sunday. And then on Monday, you can tell me." And I was really happy because I didn't have to do it anymore. Then on Monday, he gave me a list of things I needed to think about, and I got depressed for a month or two. But I chose a couple of happy days. So sometimes you have to work with yourself like a friend, but knowing what the real commitment is, okay? The most important thing is you have to help people in a way they can receive. So you have to know your child. And just because the child was born to you does not mean the child is like you. And so the most important first thing is to try to understand who God has sent you, and to try to understand on a very deep level. The words are, which way is forward for your child? Okay, here's a simple way of thinking about that. Somebody who's very, very, to advance spiritually, to expand your awareness, does not mean that you're always nice to everyone. Some people think to be spiritual means that you're always just so sweet and you never say anything unkind and you let everybody take advantage of you and walk all over you and you never cause any ripples. That's not at all true. I mean, look at Krishna. He forced Arjuna to go onto the battlefield. And Arjuna wanted to be nice, and Krishna says, you can't be nice. You have to go kill your own grandfather. You have to follow what's truthful. So if a person is very timid and never acts appropriately and lets everyone take advantage of them, progress for them is to really fight. To come home every day with a bloody nose because you had to bash it out with other children, But somebody who uses that and picks up their toys and hits the other kids all the time and is fearless about defending their turf, you need to teach that child that maybe this is not going to win you friends, because they don't need to learn the courage to stand up. They need to learn the control to not lose their temper. Complete opposite advice. One child should be getting into mischief all the time just to have the courage to do it. There's a method that I have found very helpful. The soul, the inner self, the higher self, is in charge. And the ego, the one that we're more conscious of, is actually being guided from a much higher level of our own nature. It's like when we incarnate into this world, it's a conscious decision made by our higher self. And we want to be here. And we want the experiences that we're having, even the ones that we don't want when they come. Because who am I? There's the divine I that's moving like the river to the sea, and there's the limited I that just wants to be comfortable. But the soul knows, and the soul knows what it needs in order to gain the experiences that will help it to grow. So I've found that I not only pray to Divine Mother about someone, but I actually often pray to that person's higher self. How can I help you? I don't say this out loud, but how can I help you? What words from me, what action from me would actually help you not just meet what I think you should meet, but why you were born? And it's really interesting. I mean, just face to face with people, I'll have an idea in my mind of what to say. And I'll ask, is this a good idea? And that thought will disappear from my mind. And it'll be weeks later before I even remember that I had it. Like, no, that was not the right one. Or suddenly I'll just find myself saying it without even deciding that I was going to say it. Or something completely odd and different will come out. Because now I'm trying to work not just from what I know, but from what they actually want from me. And I'll go back to the word fear. The most difficult thing in raising children is our fears. We want to protect them. But if you don't let children grow, if you always make sure that they never have disappointment, they never face challenge, they're always protected, they don't flourish. You create weaklings. Is that hard to do? Oh my gosh, is that hard to do? But that's why you have to build your own strength. Best thing you can do for your children is build a strong relationship with God. Because then these are your children. One of my friends, one more story. She was a single mother of a very strong man. Man grew up to be 6.5 feet tall and huge. Even when he was small, he was huge. And she used to do affirmations for him. She would repeat affirmations, hoping to sort of inspire him with upward thoughts. They got along very well until he got to be about 14. And then he started being really upset with her all the time. And she realized that he could feel her trying to force him to be as she wanted him to be. It just occurred to her intuitively. So she let go of this, he should be this kind of a man. And she said, Divine Mother, he's your son. I'm just taking care of him on your behalf. You know, you have to guide him. And then her prayer just became, Divine Mother, take care of him. And almost immediately, they started getting along again because she was really respecting that he's not a child. He was an old man yesterday. Now he's a baby today. You know, you children who know these sorts of things. A friend of mine, his little boy was at the stage when every single meal he would knock over his glass of milk and it would spill all over the table. And the man came home and he'd had a really hard day at work. And when the milk spilled again, he got really annoyed with his child. The little boy said, when you were the little boy and I was the daddy, I never got mad at you. So you have to also realize, another friend of mine, her little boy, he was 5 and he did something naughty. By the time I met her, he was in college, but when he was 5, he did something naughty and she disciplined him and sent him to his room. He was very mad at her. And before he left, he said, "You're a terrible mommy," like that. And then he stomped off. And then he felt that wasn't enough. And he came back and said, "You weren't even my first choice." And so she said, "Honey, who was your first choice?" She didn't know what to think. And he answered, he said, "A lady in the Philippines, but she was taken." He chose somebody else and then ended up with her. Who knows? You know, was it true? Was it not true? Who knows? But it could be true. I mean, these are not children. They're just in little bodies. They have a whole destiny. We have a school. We have an elementary school and a high school. If you're interested in education, 2 of the men who are with me are high school teachers in our Living Wisdom school. The men who are singing. Let's see what the words are. Oh yes, Swami Kriyananda came to watch a school performance, and he was elderly by then, white-haired, but his vibration was so unconnected to the conventional ways that people present themselves. And this little girl was particularly intrigued by him, and she just kept staring at him. She was about 6, I think. She kept staring at him, and he was sitting down talking to people, and she kept getting closer and closer till she was really close. And she sort of looked right into his eyes and said, "How old are you anyway?" And he said, "I'll put it like this." He said, "When I was a little boy, you were an old woman." And she looked a little puzzled. And then she seemed to get it and she just marched happily off. That's right. Before it was your baby, had a whole life experience. Keep that in mind. Relate to the soul reality of your children. Be an appropriate parent because you have a real job to do. Just because they have a soul nature doesn't mean you can just sit back. You have a real job to do, but do it in that context. Who are you? How can I help you become who you are trying to be? Where does the soul go after it's complete? Okay, it's a little beyond my portfolio, but I will try. You're thinking in terms of physical realities. And once you start talking about the soul, there's no geography. It's a vibration of consciousness. And there's no space, no place. It simply vibrates in the universe. You're actually asking, oh dear, let me think if I can even come close to this. An avatar is a fully realized soul who no longer vibrates. Think about it as vibrations. Who no longer vibrates separate from the absolute stillness of one. You know, when the people were singing up here, they were rehearsing earlier, and they just, when they were singing the trio where they were in harmony, and they kept stopping and just tuning it until the voices were exactly matched. That's literally exactly what we're doing. There is a vibration, which is our true nature, which is always here. It's not like we have to go somewhere, it's always here, but we're singing out of harmony with it. And as we begin to open ourselves spiritually, we become aware of that tone. This is in the Indian music. They always have the tambura in the back, and the tambura just repeats these same notes. When Keshava was singing that song, Halsey was just playing the drone. Keshava was going all like this, but the drone was just constant. It was holding everything. Creation is held by the Om vibration, by perfect silence, by perfect stillness, and we're going like this all the time. And because we're vibrating out of attunement with us, we suffer. And when we begin to match our vibration to the actual vibration of infinity, then we don't suffer anymore. And we cease to exist in the way that we think of ourselves as separate. It's the bubble merges into the ocean. The interesting fact is that whenever the bubble is needed, it can come out of the ocean as the bubble. That's what the avatar is. From a life of infinite, I'm quoting from a poetic thing that Swami wrote. From a life of infinite joy and freedom in God, willingly to embrace limitation, pain, and death for the salvation of mankind. That's what an avatar is. His gone, individuality is gone, but then it can be reasserted because he has compassion for all of us. Yogananda went so far as to say, when he takes an incarnation and he sees the personality he has to assume, at first he says it's uncomfortable, like a heavy overcoat on a hot day. And then I get used to it, he said. That partially answers your question, I hope. This gentleman here who's about to step up here, he's better at answering those kinds of questions than I am. So you can ask him afterwards. Okay. Thank you all very much. Great joy to be with you.